Today is our Civil Rights Luncheon for the National Dental Association, and we always look to award and to have speakers come out to it that will give a sense of what we're about, our support of civil rights. So I think we have the best candidate.
Thank you so much.
You have a special guest here. Chief Justice, tell us, what's your message here today?
Well, I really appreciate this invitation from Dr. Romel Madison and the members of the Dental Association. I think what we don't realize is that people from all walks of life, doctors and just ordinary folk have been on the front lines in terms of civil rights struggle. And here locally, of course, most people know Dr. Romel Madison because of the Danziger Bridge incident where his brother Ronald was killed and his brother Lance was incarcerated. And so we all know about Danziger Bridge. And so when we think about heroes, Dr. Madison is one as well. We have 50 years to celebrate, 50 years of civil rights, and this is the celebration of the Civil Rights Act that was signed in 1964 by President Lyndon Johnson. It shows where we've come as a nation. It shows we got past the racism and the segregation. We'll talk about all of those local heroes as well, the sit-ins, the bus boycotts, the Freedom Riders, Freedom Summer in Mississippi. I think all of those are things to point out as we celebrate 50 years of civil rights. I'm glad to see that some of you may remember a time when we didn't have open access. I certainly remember segregated schools, and in fact, I graduated from a segregated high school right here in New Orleans. I remember riding in the back of the bus and the limitations on travel because of we didn't have the Civil Rights Bill. So this is something to celebrate, the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, the act signed by President Lyndon Johnson on July 2nd, 1964, that ended segregation in public facilities, and with the stroke of a pen, this act declared that all Americans could travel freely through America, could use restrooms and public accommodations, drink at water fountains, use parks and zoos and swimming pools. In fact, the act says that any business providing service to the general public could not discriminate based on race. So I'm glad we're here today to talk about some of the folks who really did make sacrifices so that we could enjoy some of these privileges. The Freedom Riders we pay tribute to, the ones who, the young men and women, black and white, who got on buses and tested the 1961 act that was signed by the Interstate Commerce Commission that outlawed discrimination on buses. What they said was that, this is all well and good, but we've got to see if this law is effective. And so they got on buses to see whether things would change when they got to Georgia and Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. A lot of you are younger than I am, but some of you may know what happened. The bus traveled through Georgia, got to Anniston, and a mob stopped the bus and burned the Greyhound bus. They called out the state troopers and got them to the state line in Alabama, and Mississippi met them at the state line and arrested all of them and put them in notorious Parchman Prison. And of course, that first wave was followed by others because other young college-age students, black and white, male and female, got on buses to test the law that had been signed by the Interstate Commerce Commission. And at the end of the summer, there were hundreds of them in the jail. And rather than being tormented, they were tormenting their jailers by singing freedom songs. When we talk about where were you when all of this was going on, what's interesting is that in conversations and casual conversations now, folk who did nothing in a civil rights struggle will say, well, I was there with the Freedom Riders, I was there for the March on Washington. But there's always a record. There's always a record. If you look at the mug shots from Parchman Prison, you'll see Jerome Smith and Julia Aaron and Dodie Smith Simmons, and what they thought was a shameful thing is now a badge of courage, because, you know, they can say 50 years later, no, you weren't in Parchman, but I was. So we appreciate that sacrifice. The fact that some of them were beaten, and some of them on the front line. We know it was school children in Birmingham, Alabama, standing up to Bull Connor and his dogs and water hoses. We have just so many folk we could pay tribute to today who actually made sacrifices. Here in New Orleans, we applaud the courage and sacrifice of Aretha Castle Haley. Her son works for me now, Ochame Haley. She has two sons who are lawyers, Sundiata Haley and Ochame Haley, had 4 sons. Her sister Doris Jean Castle, Raphael and Inez Casimir, these are the ones who are out there with the signs on Canal Street to picketing the Woolworths and the McCurries, and sitting down at the lunch counter where folks were pouring hot coffee on them and subjecting them to other indignities, but they took it all because they were demanding equal service, and we eventually were able to accomplish that. We're here today to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Freedom Summer. I met Miriam Wright Edelman in Jackson, Mississippi, that summer. She was one of I think, the first black woman to be licensed as a lawyer in the state of Mississippi. And hundreds of black and white college students converged on Mississippi to assist Fannie Lou Hamer and all of those leaders who are out there trying to get people to register and vote. Fannie Lou Hamer, we know about her sacrifices, a woman who started life as a sharecropper but wanted something better. And they beat her in Parchman Prison as well. We owe a debt of gratitude to the young folk on the front lines of CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, and SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. There were so many of them who gave their time and their talents, their lives. Viola Liuzzo, a white housewife, I think from Michigan, who came down to Alabama to work, and a sniper killed on a bus in Alabama. We owe a gratitude to the doctors and the lawyers and ordinary people who funded Brown against Board of Education. I'm an active member of the National Bar Association that's meeting in Atlanta this year. At one of our meetings, we were giving the Gertrude Rush Award, which is one of our greatest awards, the highest awards, to Arthur Fletcher, a lawyer from California. And if you know politics in the National Bar, and I've been around National Bar 30 years, you know, there are a few people a little bit disgruntled. Well, why in the world are you giving an award to a Republican? And so Aljanita Davis Scott had to tell them, this is why we're giving the National Bar Association Gertrude Rush Award to Arthur Fletcher. He's one of the lawyers from California who funded Brown against Board of Education. He and his wife had 5 children. Every time an employer found out that he was funding that lawsuit, they fired him. His wife became so depressed and despondent about his employment situation with 5 children, she jumped off the Bay Bridge. And so Aljanita asked her, "What did you do for civil rights?" What did you do? You know, you don't think he deserves the award? What did you do? Well, that's what Arthur Fletcher did, and he deserved the award. There are many who we owe a debt of gratitude to: Harold Belafonte and Ruby Dee and Ozzie Davis and others in the arts who supported Dr. King financially and on the front lines of the struggle. We see them in old photographs. They're marching with Dr. King. There's a local activist, his name is Don Hubbard, who told me this story. Lena Horne donated a new Ford Fairlane station wagon to the students working in Mississippi that Freedom Summer, and they gave him the vehicle to drive down from New York to Mississippi. He drove it to Mississippi and handed it over to James Chaney that summer. And they found the station wagon, they pulled it out of the river and found the bodies of James Chaney, Michael Schwerner, and Andrew Goodman under a landfill in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And we always ask folks, well, where were you when President Kennedy was assassinated? Some of you were born after 1963. Where were you when Martin Luther King was assassinated? I was in my senior year at LSU Law School. Bloody Sunday on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I heard someone criticize John Lewis once. They said, "How did he get to be a congressman with that slurred speech?" And I said, well, if they'd crack your head open on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, you might talk with a slurred speech too. But we're proud of his sacrifice, a 20-year-old who, he said he thought they were just going to take him to jail. He had his little backpack ready because they were arresting. They were on their way across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and he never expected to get someone to hit him in the head and suffered so grievously. So for the young people, every generation has challenges. If it's not Freedom Summer, it'll be something coming up. There are always battles. And your job is not to be like Rip Van Winkle and sleep through the revolution. Don't wake up when it's all over. We know we've got to be vigilant because no battles are permanently won. Despite the Voting Rights Act, every state is trying to put new restrictions on voting rights, limiting the hours at the poll, reducing access to absentee ballots, eliminating early voting, requiring more identification, picture ID, ask somebody 90 years old, go find a birth certificate. So we have to be vigilant and have to be insistent that we can't turn the clock back, that the rights that have been won, we must maintain for the next generation. I want to publicly commend the many members of this organization who stood with Dr. Romel Madison and our family when his brother Ronald was killed on the Danziger Bridge and Lance was arrested following Hurricane Katrina. We would have had a much different outcome had this organization and others not stepped up to say that justice must be served. We would not have been able to bring the perpetrators to justice without your support. It takes leaders like you who speak out to make the difference when something is going wrong in any one particular community. And following Katrina, we did need that outcry from folk in other places around the country. My job is adjudicative and administrative, as we do writs and opinions, and we review cases. We also do supervisory things with regard to licensing lawyers and disbarring lawyers, and we sometimes have to take a judge off the bench if the Judiciary Commission recommends it. So we've got a big responsibility. One of the things we've got to do in Louisiana, of course, is to deal with the high incarceration rate here in Louisiana. Now, you probably don't have this problem in your community. The United States incarcerates more people than any other nation in the world. And Louisiana leads all 50 states in the numbers that we incarcerate. 1 out of every 55 adults are incarcerated in Louisiana. Our prison population has doubled over the last 20 years. It costs us something like $700 million a year to manage our prison system. And one of the challenges we face is how do we maintain safety and not bankrupt ourselves, because when we've got some elections coming up this fall and judges running for office and district attorneys and sheriffs, everybody wants to be tough on crime. We had a judge here in Louisiana, here in New Orleans, Matthew Braniff. He'd stand there and, well, he'd sit there, the defendant would be standing before the bar, and he'd say, 800 years, and the defendant would say, I can't do 800 years. And he said, well, do as many as you can. Tough on crime. Everybody, a sentence of 200, 300, 400, 500 years, because it sounds like we're being tough on crime. Despite those sentences, we still have murders, and we still have crime, and we still can't seem to get a handle on that, and we've got to do something different. In Louisiana, African Americans make up about 1/3 of the population, and 68.3% of the folk who are incarcerated by the Department of Corrections. We're trying to do some things different. We have drug programs now. My numbers tell me that the number of people who are incarcerated for violent crimes is something like about 40%. There's some folk, the rapists and the murderers and these are folk we've got to lock up. But the other 60%, if they, it's a case of possession of marijuana or drug paraphernalia or drug residue, do we really need to spend $35,000 a year to lock up people like that? So we've tried to do it differently with drug courts. We've got about 50 drug courts here in the state, and we're making some progress. We've got a reentry program that I just went to visit up at Angola, where we're teaching some young offenders with short sentences how to repair automobiles and do air conditioning repair and various other jobs where they can be licensed and come home and get a good job. They're telling me that with certification, you can make about $75,000 a year in some of these jobs that they're training them for. They've got people working with them who getting job slots and opportunities for them at various dealerships around the state. And so we want to be smart, and we want to see what we can do to retrain, educate some of these folk so that they can go home to their families and they can raise their children and they can pay taxes. So I encourage you to do what you can in your communities as well. I know that there's so many initiatives that are reaching out to ex-offenders with reentry. There's so many things we need to do to reach young black men so that they have another alternative if they don't have fathers in their own home. And so we need to do all of those things to make our communities better. I appreciate this opportunity to be here with you today and congratulate you on the work that this organization has done to move us forward in the area of civil rights.
To present 3 awards to our civil rights awardees. The first one I'd like to present to Chief Justice Burnett Joshua Johnson for her contribution to the civil rights movement, and there was a lot more in the program that wasn't mentioned that she did and how she represented the African Americans in courts of defending them for their civil rights in different situations. Our award reads Chief Justice Burnett Joshua Johnson, 101st Annual Convention, New Orleans, July 2014. We want to thank you very much and thank you for coming out. Our second awardee is one of our own and one of our loyal colleagues. If you look at the program, there's a lot to be said about him that a lot of us may not have been aware of, but he's been fighting a long and steady battle in the city of Lafayette, Louisiana. He's been a very loyal supporter of the NDA, Pelican State Dental Association, and the Baton Rouge Capital Dental Society. Today, I'd like to present this award to Dr. Rafael Barranco from the National Dental Association Annual Convention, July 2014.
And Dr. Madison, I want to know if I want to say a few words. There are a few things I would like to say. First of all, it's a particular occasion, and I'm pleased to have been awarded this at the same time that Chief Justice Honorable Burnett Johnson was here on program. And listening to her relate the history of the civil rights movement brought back a lot of memories, because at the time they walked across the bridge, I had just gotten to Tuskegee. So that was fresh in my mind. Since I've been involved in education, I want to emphasize that again. Having come through the all-black system, I never heard that I couldn't be I never heard that I could not be anything I wanted to be if I studied. And that kind of encouragement goes into your subconscious, and when you are confronted with a situation, you turn around and you spontaneously react. The one incident that I'd like to just relate to you very briefly is that when I got to Lafayette, in 1968, to open an office, I got involved in trying to learn as much about Lafayette as I could. Now remember, the Civil Rights Act was passed in '64. And here it was in 1970, and they closed the only black high school in Lafayette. And in that May meeting of the community, black community, school board member representing the black folks of Lafayette and the white folks of Lafayette, because it was parish-wide then, stood up in front of the group, and when somebody challenged him, he said, "I don't represent your niggers. I want to represent the white folks." And instinctively, I stood up and said, "I'm running against you." And 2 or 3 weeks later, they came by the office and asked me, was I sure? And I said, absolutely, I got nothing to lose. I'm independent, they can't fire me. All they can do is run me out of town, and I don't believe they want to do that. And so that, I believe that the Almighty inspires you and puts you in places to do the things you do. It's not that you go looking for them. They just come naturally, and how you respond depends on your education and background. And I do want to say this because the young people today don't know our history, and they've been led to believe that it's something different, and we're about to lose all of our cultural attachments to the past. So I want to encourage you to talk to the young people, get them to go back and try to learn the history of the past. And for that, I thank you.
Our last award goes to an individual that's done quite a bit of work here in New Orleans. Besides being a TV celebrity, Wendell Pierce has worked to help restore neighborhoods. He has stood up for civil rights issues. He's been a grave supporter. And as you've seen on TV, most of the TV celebrities always get the attention. He can bring the attention and bring the information to the area, to the public, to the nation. So this has helped one of our leading neighborhood entities, which is Pontchartrain Park, one of the first black developments for black homeowners here in New Orleans. And it's done it was a great incentive for all the African Americans in New Orleans to become homeowners. So this started that mission, and he came back and he restored it after Hurricane Katrina. I'd like to, at this time, because he's filming in Toronto, we have a young lady here that's going to accept the award on his behalf. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ms. Grefford Bradford, who's here as the president of the Pontchartrain Park Residents Association.
All right, on behalf of Wendell Pierce, I would like to say thank you. And yes, I am the Neighborhood Association president for Pontchartrain Park. And Wendell was a strong advocate in the return of our neighborhood. Without him, I don't think we would have gotten the awareness that we needed to rebuild. And that, as my friend here stated earlier, Pontchartrain Park was the first African-American subdivision, and it was developed in 1958, and it helped a lot of African-Americans have the opportunity to own homes. And they was going to let it go after Hurricane Katrina, but Wendell helped fight to bring it back. So thank you very much on his behalf.
I think we're going to have closing remarks. Okay. You know, we were told in our opening session that we must never let our guard down, because every time we do, and we forget about the fight that has gone on all the years to get us where we are. So as I also said in another meeting, we're responsible. We should take the charge or the lead in being the advocates for keeping this alive. You know, I've had phone banks during elections at my office, and we represent hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of patients that we can also advise as to keeping their guards up, doing what they need, doing what they should be doing, to keep our rights in effect. So once again, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this program, and keep on enjoying New Orleans one more day.
Thank you, Dr. Madison. Wow, I'm overwhelmed. You took me back too far. I'm not sure I wanted to go that far. But here we are, and I bring you greetings as your acting president and your president-elect. You know, we have come a long way. We've got a much, much further journey to go. Good afternoon and welcome to our Civil Rights Luncheon in New Orleans. To Dr. Madison and his committee, thank you for a job well done. In the early years, the strength of the National Dental Association came from perseverance of the original trailblazers and their immediate families, who were determined to create an organization that they all could be very proud of, an organization that they could call their own. Holding the organization together during those days wasn't easy, and it's not easy now either. In those days, the so-called Negroes were not welcome in most public places, as the justice stated, including hotels like this one, restaurants. So the only places they were welcome were places of color, places where Black people owned. Our trailblazers also went to Negro schools back then, to churches, to establishments, as I said before, that were Black-owned. On many occasions, when the group traveled, they stayed in each other's homes. Our pilgrimage was an extremely difficult one, but character and determination made us strong. The joy is not always in the journey, but in the destination. Here we are today in this facility, great service, wonderful food. We have truly come a long way, over 100 years. But we must continue the journey. The relevancy of the National Dental Association is more important now than ever before. As we eat here today and we share our past, there are other people meeting to destroy us, and we must be aware of that. They do not want us involved in policy making. And if we're not at the table, then we're on the menu and we'll probably be consumed. So I say to you, if not now, when? And if not you, who? You know, our trailblazers had many, many more struggles. They didn't have access to what the justice spoke of. We have access. My question and my challenge to you then, again, for the convenience that we have for this convention, do you have the perseverance, the pride our trailblazers had? And I say to you, if not now, when? And if not you, who? Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the convention and safe travels.
My reaction, I am very much so overwhelmed and very much so appreciative to the pioneers and the trailblazers of our profession and the leaders in our communities.
This has been a fantastic event. It couldn't have come at a more significant time to be honored with Chief Justice Bernard Johnson on the 101st anniversary of this organization. So this is a very special occasion for me to be recognized at this time.
Oh, I just think it was so inspirational to move forward. Justice Johnson, her speech was just so wonderful because it just inspired me to advocate and to continue to fight for my community.
We never can know exactly what challenges the next generation will face, and I think when I'm talking to young people and trying to motivate them and encourage them to be involved, I'm saying to them that they just have to have the courage to step up and be involved in their generation and the issues of their day.
This has been an awesome convention, and the topics that have been discussed with what's going on in healthcare, what's going on in Tennessee, what's going on throughout this country with African Americans. This has been right on point. It takes us back to our history to see what we have gone through, what we have accomplished as a race, and how important it is for the relevancy of the National Dental Association at this time. Because right now we have to be at the table when policies are being made. We must be at the table to give our insight as to what we must do, what stand we must take for the people of color and for those that are underserved and for those that cannot speak for themselves. So the National Dental Association is a civil rights organization. We do take a stand. We were here in New Orleans for Dr. Romel Madison's, when his brother was killed. We were here, we took a stand after the Katrina episode. We're here in Tennessee. We're going to take a stand and support our leadership, support our members and the people that we serve. So this is very important, and it just confirms the need and the relevancy of the National Dental Association.